All right. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for today's wonderful event. I am Ben Freer, the co-chair of the NGO Committee on the Family, New York. And I am really happy to be here for our event today. Each April, we are really thrilled to have what we see as the next generation of psychologists who will hopefully do a better job of managing the world's problems than the generations that have come before. And so I am always so happy to have this event. I want to let you all know that for today's event, the committee member that has been most pivotal in ensuring that this event took place and takes place is Dr. Florence Denmark. Florence is not able to be with us today, but is certainly sending positive thoughts and emotions to all of our presenters and all of us as well. And so today's event, we will open with our presenters, providing an overview of the event. And we have 5 presenters who will speak, and then we'll have about 20 minutes left at the end for some question and answer and discussion that I look really forward to. And so I will turn it over to Taylor to get us started on the overview of the event, and then to our first presenter. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Ben. Let me begin by sharing my screen. And just checking that everyone can see this okay. Great. Well, thank you again, Ben, for that lovely introduction. Welcome to this year's annual student-led event entitled Siblings Through the Generations. Thank you to the NGO Committee on the Family for inviting us to speak today. Under the direction of Dr. Florence Denmark, I am joined here today with my fellow peers to speak on the topic of sibling relationships and how family dynamics may influence relationships over time. I'm Taylor Mulligan. I attend Pace University. I am graduating in May, so just a couple of weeks. And I will be starting my PsyD program come fall with Pace. I'm also an intern at the International Council of Psychologists and just finished and wrapped up Psychology Day, which was a great experience. And I'll turn it over to Olivia to introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Olivia Friedman, and I'm a first-year doctoral student at Adelphi University. I am also an intern for the International Council of Psychologists with Taylor, and also with Taylor on the board of the Social Media Committee for PCUN. And I'll pass it along to Anna.
Hi, everybody. My name is Anna Stauber. I was an intern at the International Council of Psychologists for last year and the year before. This is my 3rd time doing a presentation for the Family Committee, and I'm super excited about that. I now work for Duluth Aging Support here in my home state of Minnesota, where I'm continuing to work for the Committee on Aging as a project consultant. And I'll pass it on to Dev.
Hi, everybody. I'm Dev. I am an MA psychology student at Pace. And this is my first opportunity to present here, and I'm really excited about it. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Andrea. I'll speak real quick, just in case there's any background noise. I'm an MA PACE student in psychology, and I'm also a pre-med. So my plans are actually both in medicine and psychology, and this is my first time here, so I'm really excited. Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you, everyone. Sorry. So to begin, this event was inspired by several theories surrounding sibling relationships and how individuals who have a sibling, many siblings, or even siblings that aren't from the same biological parents find their role in their own unique family dynamic. Family dynamics can come in many forms, and many outside factors can influence how siblings relate to one another, challenge each other, and grow together or apart over time. In childhood, siblings are often our first allies and rivals. And in adulthood, siblings are often the only other individuals in the world that we can relate to because they know us the most intimately. Sulliway's Born to Rebel hypothesis states how siblings find what role best suits them in their family structure, a role that hasn't been previously fulfilled by another sibling, such as older siblings taking on the caregiver role, whereas younger siblings tend to be more open-minded or lighthearted. The family systems theory emphasizes the interconnectedness of family members and how that plays a role in how we interact with one another, such as in parent-child relationships and, of course, sibling relationships. Environmental and social contexts also play a role in sibling relationships and can influence how relationships develop over time. Sibling relationships in adulthood can be influenced by a number of factors that we will discuss today, starting with physical distance, migration, multi-religion families, parental divorce, and siblings with disabilities.
Hello, everybody. I'm going to cover the first point, physical distance, right? So over time, despite strong emotional bonds, siblings tend to grow further and further apart from a physical distance standpoint. And if you look at it, there are multiple factors that drive this, right? For women, sometimes women leave their childhood homes when they get married and move into their husbands' homes. And that sometimes will increase the physical distance between female siblings and their counterparts, right? Economic progress also results in a shift in siblings and where they're located. Because as you shift from a joint multi-generational family to more nuclear structures, sometimes even male siblings will stop living in their parents' homes and move maybe to the city, maybe further away, right? Which also has an effect on making siblings move further apart from a physical distance standpoint. And then lastly, of course, globalization. That's resulted in individuals moving further and further apart to different corners of the globe. And this, no surprises, because of careers or marriages, may also take siblings away further apart from one another, right? So you have all these factors that are increasing physical distance, but great to know that technology has stepped in. So the increased physical distance has not necessarily resulted in an increased social distance, because technology stepped in to facilitate communications despite these large physical distances. A couple of examples of that include, research has shown that siblings are staying in touch via phone or social media at least once a week or several times a week on average. And then video conferencing platforms like Zoom and Google Meet, they transcend geographic boundaries and really allow for real-time, face-to-face interactions at minimal, sometimes at no cost, right? Some of these services are free. And I can talk from personal experience, with the pandemic, this picture you see on the left is a Zoom call between my cousins. And in this picture, you have individuals who are located in Mumbai, in New Zealand, Canada, even within the US, Seattle, and the East Coast. And that was enabled by a Zoom session, right? Thank you. So we're going to move on to the next point.
And so I'd just like to note, Andrea is here with us today, but she has a little bit of background noise. So she thankfully recorded her presentation, but she will be available for question and answer.
Hi everyone, this is Andrea speaking. My teammate just spoke about siblings around the world, and it brings us to the topic of migration. I will touch on 4 points, namely differences concerning age and sex, migration trauma, therapy, and migration later in life, while I will be also adding a personal perspective. I am one of those siblings. My brother, who is 12 years older than me, migrated first, and by that time, he was already married and had one small son and a dog, of course. On the other hand, I did not migrate alone, as my parents also decided to flee Venezuela due to the ongoing crisis. I should point out that roughly 6 million Venezuelans have left the country in the past 5 years or so, and therefore, as our subject indicates, siblings in migration families is a situation that many of us experience. I will address my part of the presentation point by point. So, first, I will talk about sibling differences in birth order, sibling sex, and siblings' ages, and their effect on migration. It has been found that the likelihood of migrating is not equally divided within a same household or a family living together, and it is higher for sons, though it strongly decreases with birth order, as it was our case. Also, it was reported that daughters are significantly less likely to migrate than sons by 3.6%, which again could have been my case had we not made it a family decision. Second, concerning migration trauma, research shows that leaving behind close family members at a young age may lead to an insecure attachment pattern, which is characterized by fear of abandonment and jealousy in adulthood if it is left untreated. In fact, it may even lead to sibling rivalry, which has been found to be a trigger for migration trauma, but also a trigger to acculturative stress and psychological distress. Then, third, regarding therapy, research has highlighted that art therapy, in particular, helps by, one, promoting spontaneous disclosure to trauma, which is key for a better understanding of the situation and subsequent healing process. Second, identifying spirituality as a source of resiliency, which is needed, of course, to process and overcome hardship. Third, reinforcing cultural family dynamics, which are the ones that influence our well-being and behaviors. And fourth, indicating symbols of acculturation, which is key for the adaptation to the place we move to. Then fourth and last, concerning migration towards siblings in later life, research findings have shown that not having children and not being married, which is either being widowed or divorced or just being an older adult who never married, is associated with a higher likelihood of moving closer to a sibling, as well as having families clustered at a distance, which is something we can see happening in places such as Chinatown or with Venezuelans in Miami. In fact, the only thing that can hinder us moving towards a sibling later in life, according to research, is being already close to a sibling. So now I turn to my teammates who will talk about religion, divorce, and other topics relating to siblings through the generations.
All right, so now, thank you, Andrea. Now I'll be talking about siblings in families that share multiple religions. Although I'm also going to sort of broaden this topic a little bit into siblings that experience disparity in religiousness. Studies in the late half of the 20th century spent time attempting to identify if there's a relationship between birth order and trends in levels of religiousness. In the 90s and early 2000s, it was found that there might be different personality trait groupings that are shared between firstborn siblings and a very different set of personality traits associated with later born siblings. Older siblings tend to have higher levels of conscientiousness, conservatism, and traditionalism, all of which are more likely to be found in people who self-identify as religious. And on the other hand, later born siblings tend to have higher self-reported levels of liberal or rebellious personality traits. These types of traits, understandably, are less associated with high levels of religiousness. On the surface, these differences appear to be indicators that birth order itself plays a role in the level of religiousness, but there are other sociodevelopmental factors likely at play here. One of the big ones is parental relationships. These are the relationships that dictate how a person is socialized in their early years. Firstborn children, by nature of being an only child at the beginning of their life before their other siblings are born, are likely to develop a similar level of religiousness as their parents. And this is less true of later born siblings. In 1983, a review of previous studies suggested that there's a significantly high number of firstborns among ministers, priests, and seminarians. This study only looked at Catholic and Protestant environments in North America and Europe. However, for the time, it was still fairly comprehensive within these bounds. The psychologist who conducted this review, Godin, suggested that this finding may not necessarily be a consequence of inherited psychological or personality traits commonly possessed by firstborns. Instead, it might have been an effect of socio-demographic and historic factors. Godin hypothesized that historic tradition, such as offering a firstborn son to the church or bringing children to be educated in religious institutions due either to poverty or lack of educational opportunities outside the church, as well as the confounding of firstborn children with only children, could certainly be adding weight to the results of the studies that he reviewed. So now we'll change the slide and look at how religiousness affects relationships between siblings. In 2005, Milveski and his team found that relationships might be less strong as siblings reach adulthood if all of the siblings report low levels of religiousness. His team specifically cited that non-religious sibling groupings tend to report lower levels of support and warmth when compared with adult siblings where at least one person identifies as religious. This research, which took place in 2005, doesn't really appear to have been replicated since his team conducted their study. So it's super difficult to say with any level of certainty if there's a true relationship between warmth and support between siblings and religiousness in adulthood. So we're going to move on and look at siblings who adhere to different religious practices. Siblings are traditionally defined as children who share at least one parent, whether through birth, adoption, or other means. And this does not mean that they share religious practices. So we know how siblings can differ in levels of religiousness, but what about when they adhere to different religious practices or different religions altogether? And why does this happen? A sibling can marry into a different religious practice, which has become fairly common in the last 40 years. Marrying into a different religion is more common in family members who report higher levels of independence from their families. It's also more common between people who may have different religious practices, but their level of religiousness is similar. Research suggests that siblings who choose different religious practices may have been affected by relationship experiences early in life, often negative. According to Nemini and Merkin in 2009, there's a significant relationship between the loss of one or both parental figures and choosing a religious affiliation apart from the prescribed religion from their childhood. Other psychological stressors through childhood or young adulthood, such as divorce, being confronted with drug or alcohol dependency, or experiencing little social support from parental or other family members, can also have an effect on siblings choosing to change religious practices in adulthood. When the change in religion is due to psychological stressors from within the family unit, it appears to be a generally positive experience to change religions for that sibling who decides to do so, despite the breaking of tradition from within their family of origin. Nemini and Merkin also found that converts report higher levels of social support and lower levels of personal problems than they did before their conversion. It's interesting to note here that in this study, they didn't find any significant correlations between sibling birth order and choosing to change practices, although it's suggested that converts often come from families with higher than average child counts. Another interesting point is that there doesn't appear to be much research conducted on how the relationship between siblings is affected once one or more siblings convert to a different religious practice. In its current iteration, the body of research that we have suggests that specific religious practices of family members might be less important to an ongoing positive adult sibling relationship than having similar levels of religiousness between siblings. It also suggests that birth order might indicate levels of religiousness due to social influence, but not to biological imperatives. It's also, we just need to complete our look into multi-religion families by saying there's a lot more data to be collected and research to be conducted in this field. So I'll move it on to our next speaker.
So the next topic is siblings in divorced families. And so often when you think of divorced families, you think of children potentially acting out during or after a parental split, and either parents creating a favoritism when one sibling feels, or shows certain emotions. However, research has shown that siblings experience elevated levels of closeness as a result of the shared experience of going through the divorce of their parents. Sibling relationships foster feelings of reassurance, promote resilience, continuity, and support during family restructuring. Children with siblings may adjust better to parental divorce than children that do not have siblings. Sibling relationships may act as a buffer, protecting children from some of the harmful effects of divorce. Research has shown that female older siblings reported higher levels of dominance toward younger siblings and more caretaking roles and behaviors. However, later on in life, they exude feelings of feeling less confident in their own relationships as young adults. Parents coping with their own sadness and loss may become emotionally unavailable after divorce, so siblings turn to each other. They may feel their sibling is the one who truly understands the loss or the change. An adult brother or sister might step in to offer a younger sibling moral support and caretaking and helping them understand divorce and what is happening. In some cases, a parent-child dynamic may even develop among siblings. Anxiety and depression, as well as anger, typically occur as brothers and sisters are forced to contend with great challenges during their parents' divorce, which may be contributed to rearranged living situations, relocation to a different neighborhood or town, a change in schools, and the potential for parents of remarrying or blending families together, which creates environments for step-parents and step-siblings. These are some factors that create these feelings of anxiety, depression, and anger amongst siblings. So to understand a little bit more specifically, siblings are generally characterized as genetically sharing the same mother and father. So that's important when understanding sibling dynamics. Half-siblings share a biological connection to only one parent, and step-siblings are not genetically related, but are linked to each other because their parents have romantically partnered. Just as relationships with biological siblings influence individuals' development and adjustment, half and step-siblings also influence development and affect children's adjustment to family transitions. Conflict with step-siblings or not feeling at home may arise. Youth may acquire half or step-siblings more significantly. Youth who had acquired half or step-siblings were significantly more likely to agree that their biological parents' divorce resulted in greater peace in their homes than those with full biological parents only. Further, those living with half-siblings, step-siblings, that's a tricky one, step-siblings, or both, agreed that life had gotten better since divorce. However, in adulthood, sibling relationships can be affected as well. So if parents choose to remarry when children are older, how does this impact parent caregiving responsibilities later on in life? So siblings that acquire half-siblings or step-siblings later on in life are financially responsible for these new parental figures, that may not have a relationship with them as well developed because they didn't grow up in the same household as them. They may feel not as responsible emotionally or physically for those parents. And there's definitely a gap in the research surrounding adult children who obtain step-siblings as a result of parents remarrying. And this is definitely an area that can be further researched. And I feel through my research on my own that this is definitely a gap that's being navigated through most recently. And next, we'll turn it over to Olivia.
Thank you, Taylor. I'll be speaking to everyone on the topic of siblings with disabilities. So the research on siblings with disabilities lies in two major areas, one being the siblings of individuals with intellectual and socio-emotional disability, and then the other being siblings of those with physical disabilities. So speaking to the first, siblings of those with intellectual disabilities and autism spectrum disorder were identified as a vulnerable population starting in the 70s. And a majority of the literature in this area pertains to siblings during childhood. A strengths-based approach to this work emerged out of the positive psychology movement in the late 90s. And there is substantial data on sibling-mediated interventions for children with autism spectrum disorder. One such intervention engaged siblings in 10-minute social skills lessons, teaching them behavioral strategies meant to encourage the use of joint attention as well as social behaviors in their brothers. And the results showed 75% of children with ASD displayed increases in social behaviors. And moreover, children may gain enhanced adaptability, empathy, and tolerance from having a sibling with a disability. That being said, adverse outcomes have also been evaluated, including parentification, in which one sibling takes on a paternal role for their sibling with a disability. And higher rates of anxiety, depression, and difficulty with peers have also been demonstrated. Low-income families are especially vulnerable to these impacts, as these effects are amplified by limited resources. And in regard to siblings of individuals with physical disabilities, our general culture of ableism appears to influence these relationships. In a study where the implicit association was given to siblings of those with physical disabilities, results showed that the majority implicitly preferred non-disabled people, despite reporting low levels of explicit attitudes. Yet, research has shown that having a sibling with a physical disability can also increase cognitive and affective empathy. Another important area of research I would like to touch on is siblings as primary caretakers as parents age. Adults with lifelong physical disability, such as cerebral palsy, are now likely to outlive their longtime carers, typically their parents. And I'm personally familiar with this dynamic, which I saw play out between my grandmother and her brother, who was diagnosed with schizophrenia. When their parents, who had been his primary caretakers throughout his adult life, passed away, my grandmother became the primary caretaker, providing emotional, social, and financial support. And witnessing this relationship and the mutual love and care the siblings had for one another was really, truly inspirational. I will pass it along and back to Taylor now.
Thank you. So in conclusion, what is the importance of sibling relationships? I think we heard a lot today that kind of honed in on what sibling relationships mean in different dynamics and different family dynamics and structures. So besides parent-child relationships, sibling relationships are the first relationships we encounter and develop. Sibling relationships are important because they are our first peer relationships. The emotional and social support structures surrounding sibling relationships predict how we will interact with the outside world. Siblings aid in children managing the different emotions that come with situational stressors and differing environmental contexts. Therefore, it is important to understand what factors foster positive sibling relationships. Positive sibling relationships in adolescence have been associated with higher self-esteem, academic competence, and empathy in early adulthood. It is important that researchers and psychologists continue to understand just how important these relationships are and how they impact us universally. And so we would just want to conclude with a thank you again to the NGO Committee on the Family. Thank you to Dr. Florence Denmark for leading us in this important discussion regarding family dynamics and specifically sibling relationships. Thank you to my fellow presenters, Olivia, Anna, Dev, and Andrea. And lastly, thank you to all of you, the attendees, for your time. At this time, we'd like to open the floor to any questions.
Wonderful. Thank you all so much. It was really a wonderful presentation. So as is our tradition, I will take moderator privilege and ask the first question. And this is really a question that I've had for a while, ever since I knew the topic of today's event. And so is intentionally, I suppose, quite broad. But I'm curious, the way I had kind of introduced today's event was getting the perspective of our next generation of leaders in the field of psychology. And so I'm curious as to each of your perspectives on how the value or the role of sibling relationships you see changing or evolving along with changes in generations, whether that be with technology, whether that be with the priorities that we all place within our own lives. So maybe each of you kind of a thought on where do you see the importance of sibling relationships over the next 20 years. And is it different or is it the same as what it's been the previous 20 years?
Thanks, Ben. I can go first if that's okay. I think during my research, I saw a lot of relationships and sibling relationship literature speaking about how important it is for the sibling to emotionally support one another through their own life journey, but not highlighting the relationship between the siblings themselves. And so I think that it's really important that future generations look at sibling relationships, especially during times of COVID and staying at home and stay-at-home orders and different changes in the environment that they're growing up in the parent-child relationship and all the factors that we kind of spoke about today, but also how staying at home and forcing each other to be in the same room, forcing each other to be around each other and foster those relationships even more, will that create a world of stronger sibling relationships, or I want to get away from my sibling and I don't want to be close to my sibling at all? And I think there will be a huge change, and I think that it is inspiring to see that sibling relationships being researched more in the literature is wonderful, and I think that created an environment for this COVID world to be researched as well.
I can pick up where Taylor is speaking. I agree. I think that the pandemic has made huge changes for everybody in every single one of their relationships. We're all nodding along because that's just the truth. I remember talking to a friend maybe 15 years ago, and he was maybe 10 years older than me, and I was 18 at the time. And he and I were discussing why he chose to move to Minneapolis, where we were both living at the time, because his family, his parents, were far away in Michigan. And I was asking him, why would you be in Minneapolis? And he said, well, my sister and her kids are here. And as much as I love my parents, I need to form relationships with them because my parents are not going to be around forever. I'll go back and help them when they need me, but I need to be part of this younger generation's life. And I remember, at 18, not understanding necessarily that brain process, but now being a little bit further along in my own journey, I absolutely am as close to my brothers as I ever have been, despite the pandemic and them living far away. I think generational decisions have become more, it's become more important to make those generational decisions surrounding people who are closer in age to you. And I work in the field of aging advocacy, so it feels really counterintuitive to say that, but I think that's kind of the truth in families.
I can go next. And I just want to bring in the perspective from the developing world. I think traditionally, as I said in my presentation, women were considered, to have gone to another home when they got married. I think that's changing now with industrialization. There's increased awareness that it's not really a change in your home, just a change in the physical location, right? So I think that's definitely a dynamic then that's changing over the years, where female siblings are not moving further away emotionally, socially. They're still considered an integral part of their parents' homes.
And speaking to Deb's point from personal experience, I have a cousin who is the same age as me, and she is essentially a sister. We've been roommates, and she recently moved to Guatemala for work. And we have been able to stay in such close contact thanks to technology, as Deb spoke about earlier. But also in regards to what Taylor and Anna spoke about, as far as the pandemic, I think research has, of course, shown how important social support is in clinical outcomes in terms of anxiety and depression levels, particularly during the pandemic. And because our social norms have been changing, such as living at home past a certain age for a while during the pandemic, and because our sibling relationships are so much more present because of the pandemic, and siblings can be best friends, I think that is a huge factor in how this is changing over the next few years and over the next 10 years even.
I agree with what all of the team is saying. Definitely there has been some changes, but I see it more like it's such a dynamic bond and relationship that it's more like within the same relationship that it starts changing, and it's ever changing, I would say. And this relationship in particular, as we were seeing, is a bond we don't share with anybody else. Yes, we can have friends that we believe that they're like our family, but for example, in my personal experiences, my brother will always be my brother. Like perhaps a friend, maybe that can change, but my brother, even if he doesn't want to be my brother, he will be my brother forever.
Great, thank you all, really wonderful. So we had two questions very similar that is always wonderful to see about distinctions between large and small families and how that plays a role in sibling relationship development, and whether it's related to socio-emotional outcomes or other outcomes. Did any of you come across that type of information in work for your presentations or elsewhere?
The only relationship I saw between, specifically looking into the religiosity of siblings, is that there can be room for different levels of religiousness, which can cause closer warmth and support for the entire sibling grouping. A quick Google Scholar, though, does indicate that positive psychology research has been looking into this a lot. And it does look like the ability to have multiple relationships with multiple people can make a stronger bond for the overall group, which is kind of echoed in what I found in the religiousness research. Great question, though. I'd love to get more information on that and get that out to you all if I have time to do so.
Great, so maybe, oh, go ahead, Taylor, sorry.
I was just going to add, in my research of parental divorce, the research indicates that having more step siblings, half siblings, growing a bigger family creates an environment that is healthy for the social and emotional development of the individual. So like I said, also this area of research is really, it's almost new in psychology, that it's underdeveloped, and it is being developed more. So to Anna's point, I would love to research it more, but that was just my perspective of growing bigger families and putting families together. It creates more of an environment for positive relationships.
I just wanted to add, like in the research I was reading, as you know, with economic progress, families are getting smaller. And I can talk from personal experience. My mother grew up in a joint family, and there were lots of brothers and sisters. Many of them were first cousins, but they were treated like brothers and sisters. And I can see now that she's turned 80, she has a lot of emotional support. Many of them are not living anymore, but the ones who are incredibly close, and they almost form a very, it's almost like a support group for one another. And technology has enabled that because they're at different locations. but I can talk from personal experience that there's a bond, that you get from large families. Mhm.
Great. So we have a question about, and I'm going to kind of build it out a little bit, but about adopted siblings, but also step siblings, right? Where there's not the biological relationship either between the siblings or between the mother and the father, or at least mother or father in the case of stepchildren. Do you see, is there any research examining this distinction, whether that be the role of biology in sibling relationships? We have seen certainly research out there about some differences, but maybe not as many as some would expect for children, of adoptive parents. But I'm not as aware of what it looks like for sibling relationships, because we can imagine this could be a new 10-year-old child that I've never known as a sibling, who's now all of a sudden a part of my family. What does that look like? And did you all find anything about that?
So, sure. So I didn't come across this area of research when I was looking into my section, just because it was very specific. But in terms of families that have a child join the family, I think it really matters what age that's at. Like you mentioned, that if someone is age 10 and a new sibling comes along, I think that's a much different effect than if someone is age 2 and a new sibling comes along. And that's coming from me. I have a much younger sister. And so that definitely, I think, changed my perspective on sibling relationships. But I'd be really interested in knowing more of the research on that for sure.
Excuse me. So moving to our next question, thinking about cross-cultural differences, and anytime we have questions like this, it reminds me of, the universality of emotion is so consistent across cultures. Do we see that being the case for sibling relationships? Or are we seeing kind of unique natures of how cultures expect siblings to interact and relate to each other? And whether there are different expectations on siblings as to how they support each other and potentially support their parents or grandparents as they become adults themselves.
I think I could talk about that a little bit. So I guess it depends on interdependent and dependent cultures. I know there's some people that would define themselves if you ask them, who are you? I am the brother of or the sister of. Well, other person, yeah, they may be the brother of or sister of someone, but they just won't see it as something that is so detrimental in their life. So that definitely affects their role and the family dynamics as they go.
Yeah, and I want to build on what Andrea is saying, because cross-culturally, research has shown, right, the definition of self can vary. And in certain cultures, like Eastern cultures, the definition of self is more your family, right? So that's where I would think, Ben, siblings would be an integral part of your identity, much more so than maybe more individualistic cultures like the West, where the definition of self is more individual.
Interesting. That will be really interesting to see if research has examined that collectivist versus individualistic culture and whether that plays a role in how that connection occurs with siblings. Yeah. Wonderful. So another question from our group on birth order. Is there different expectations on the oldest in the family or the youngest in the family or anywhere in between on caring for their siblings, on caring for their parents as they age, anything like that?
Yeah, there's just boatloads of research on this particular topic. This one would be one of those tale as old as time, the socialization of the firstborn or the daughter of the family to become the natural or the assumed caregiver. Speaking as an oldest and the only girl of 5 children, I live in the same apartment building as my parents with my dad with dementia. And, my own association with this question is pretty significant. It is a socialization, though. It is a presumed effect in our culture here in the US right now. I'm not sure how to speak to it on a intercultural or global perspective, but there is definitely not necessarily a stigma, but a prescribed role to the oldest or female, the women in the family. Yes.
And I just wanted to add, right, from just personality theories, from a modeling standpoint, right, you have to think that the firstborn really has the parents to look to and model in terms of their behavior. And those are not other children, those are grown-ups. Whereas later born kids, have younger models to follow as well. So I think that contributes to their different development.
Oh, interesting. So moving forward into once we all are children and all goes right, we become adults. Life can turn what are really positive relationships into not so positive relationships. What are ways that when families have strife and difficulty, what are the things that prompt reconciliation or a new sense of togetherness for families, especially for those families that have lost connection or lost trust or support with each other? What are some of the mechanisms that may bring a family back together? And I think really importantly for our group, and from many groups who will view this recording in the future, is what are some of the ways that we as those interested in the family can promote healthy, happy, satisfied families to reconcile those distresses and conflicts in meaningful ways?
Sure. I think this question makes me think a lot of the therapeutic perspective on this issue, and how a lot of the times childhood patterns, especially if there is a child who is insecurely attached and moves on to be an adult, how those patterns can play out in adulthood, including among siblings. And so I think a lot of reconciliation is very difficult if those patterns are still existent. However, that being said, I do think that major life events, especially that occur within the family, whether it be a parent's death or one of the siblings goes through a major life transition, I think that those pivotal events can really bring families back together.
I think also in the world that we're living in the pandemic era, I am currently volunteering with children and family grief and bereavement group. And so there's a lot of children and adolescents that are going through grief and loss right now that are losing their parents or losing their caregivers due to, unfortunately, the world, of COVID. And what's happening is that these children are coming together and they're leaning on their siblings. Although some siblings do, create a structure of, don't be open, don't tell anyone, let's be secretive, let's keep all of our information together, we have to keep our family bond together. And so in a way, they are kind of creating that strong bond with one another, but that big life event, that loss, that grief that they're going through, they're with each other through that, and they're helping each other through that. So I think it's interesting how the dynamic is changing and how COVID also plays a role in this as well.
Mm-hmm. Great. So we had a question also about how parenting style may influence and affect sibling relationships. Do we see that the ways that parents interact with their children and parent influences the strength and lasting relationships for siblings?
I think that parenting styles absolutely influence that. In my research, it was more tailored towards favoritism. And so different parenting styles can elicit feelings or environments of favoritism and, helicopter parenting, as we've seen that, buzzword, and it can elicit, one sibling may think that a parent cares more about their academic achievement or, their performance in sports or extracurricular activities. And so the other sibling will feel that hostility towards the other sibling. And so I think parenting styles absolutely plays a role. And that's where us as, future psychologists and researchers in the field as well should implement preventative and interventions to help parents understand how much of a role they're playing in sibling relationships and what kind of environment are they fostering for their children in order to grow up in happy, healthy, positive relationship bound scenarios and environments.
Great. So another question about kind of preferences for as individuals grow. Is there a desire for similar sized families as individuals choose to start their own family? Do we see this kind of consistency? I was raised with 4 siblings, and so I also want a large family. Or I was raised with 4 siblings and I don't want a large family. This is always of interest to me. I am one of 2. I have only a sister, whereas my wife has 5 siblings. And it's always been interesting to me because a number of her siblings say that they want large families, similar size. And my wife has always said, no, that she wants a much smaller family. And so I think it speaks a little bit to some of the questions about birth order and parenting style, that everyone's experience in a family is so different and so unique based on how they interact with their siblings and how they perceive their parents' behavior, even though it could be exactly the same from child to child. So were you all able to see anything about that kind of relationship in whether children are often wanting to kind of replicate their own family dynamic in size, or is that something that we see children kind of changing as they get to make that decision? And if so, what are the factors that kind of predict who's likely to replicate the size of their family and who's likely to want to do something different? A lot of questions packed in one question.
I can talk a little bit about it. A cursory look indicates that, like Linda pointed out, that there's no one prescribed answer to any of these questions. Like you said, Ben, every person's going to have a different interaction with their own family that's going to color the way that they look at the way that they start a family once they reach adulthood and are kind of having those conversations. But it does kind of look like in the studies of only children, which I think is specifically referenced in Lynn's question, is only children oftentimes feel a little bit additional burden once they reach adulthood and find themselves maybe having their own children as well as caring for their parents. So there is a little bit of a correlation, it seems to be. Again, this is not my area of expertise or anything, but there does appear to be at least an interest in finding out if only children, once they reach adulthood, do have more than one child. It does seem to be a little bit of a pattern. That's all I can say to it for now.
Mm-hmm.
Just to continue with Anna, since this was actually her area, not mine, I would say that religion would play a role there. Depending on which religion actually encourages that you're supposed to have many children, I think that would also play a role. Regardless of being an only child or most likely having many siblings.
And I just want to add, in addition to religious, angles, also economic progress, right? So if you're not economically developed, sometimes you do need to have many more children because they're your social security system in a certain sense, right? So depending on how you fare economically from generation to generation might determine either whether you have more children or have fewer children.
Mm-hmm. Great. Well, perfect. Well, thank you all so much for such a wonderful event. Thank you all in attendance for so many wonderful questions. and engaging in this really interactive conversation. I know that interactive conversation is always challenging in a Zoom, and so I very much appreciate everyone's ability and willingness to use the chat instead of the attempt to talk over each other through Zoom. So that is always very helpful. I wanted to wrap up. Well, before I wrap up, thank you so much to our presenters. Such a wonderful job, and so exciting to know that you all will continue kind of the work and the value that we have all put in family as you continue your careers forward, and really highlight that the family is the way that we strengthen our world and our society through policies, through decisions, through relationship building. And we need more people, right, in the world who really see and value the strength of the family in that way. And as a number have said, of the the diversity of families and how those can look and how we see that play out. So to move on to a little bit of business within the NGO Committee on the Family, we are coming to the end of some terms for the Executive Committee. The bylaws indicate that position holders can be in the same position for no more than 2 terms of 2 years each. My co-chair and I, Ryan Coe and I, as well as many on the EC board, are at the end of our time. And so we have been accepting nominations over the last few months. Those of you who are paid members of the NGO Committee on the Family, you will be receiving an email with the ballot to be able to make your vote within the, or to make nominations as well. So please keep an eye out for that. Also, if you would like to learn any more about our committee, there is our website. If you would like to join, you can go to our website. In the top right, you can click join to find information there. Always important, because I know we have a number of students here with us. Student membership is free. So a very good thing to get associated with if you would like. You'll notice on that page to join that there's a separate document that you can complete, that you can send to our treasurer, Vinny Santoro, with information about topics you'd like us to have in future events, as well as your own affiliation and things like that. That is always very helpful for us to have, so that we can tailor events to our membership, what they value and how they would like to learn more about opportunities around the world. So please keep an eye out for that. Please join if you are interested and willing. And this has been such a wonderful event. You all will be receiving our next event, will be occurring on Friday, May 13th. That is the day that we will be celebrating the International Day of the Family. We will also be assisting in the IDF event at the United Nations with Renata Kazmarska, who's the lead organizer of that event. We will also have a side event following that event that occurs in the morning. More information to follow, but those events will be about families and urbanization for the IDF event. And then our event will be about families in rural context. So trying to get a full understanding of the different experiences that families have throughout the world. So again, thank you so much all for joining us. Wonderful presentations today. And we look forward to seeing you all at our next event. Thank you. Bye-bye.